Greetings, cozy knights. Lower your swords and rest by the fire. Tonight, we journey through the complete history of dragons in Skyrim. If you're enjoying these tales, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next adventure. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're listening from tonight. But for now, let's get cozy and journey through the complete history of dragons in Skyrim together. The dawn of dragons, origins in the mists of time. Before the world knew kingdoms or empires, before mortal feet first touched the frozen peaks of Skyrim's mountains, there existed beings of immense power whose very voices could reshape reality itself. These were the dragons, children of Akatosh, the dragon god of time. Born from the primordial forces that shaped Nirn itself during the Dawn era, when the boundaries between myth and reality remained fluid as morning mist. The origins of dragons remain shrouded in mystery, even to the most learned scholars of Tamriel. Ancient tales speak of their emergence from Akavir, the mysterious eastern continent, whose very name translates to Dragonland, though other accounts mention Atmora, the frozen northern continent from which the earliest Nords sailed. What we can say with certainty is that dragons predate recorded human history, existing in ages so ancient that even the elves, who measure their civilizations in millennia, can offer only fragmentary accounts of those primordial times. Dragons are not mere beasts, despite their reptilian appearance and fearsome nature. They possess intelligence that rivals or exceeds that of any mortal race, capable of complex thought, sophisticated language, and an understanding of magic that transcends conventional mortal comprehension. Their physical form reflects this extraordinary nature with scales harder than the finest armor, wings that can carry them effortlessly through storm winds that would ground any lesser creature, and eyes that burn with an intelligence both ancient and alien to mortal understanding. The dragon language itself represents something far more profound than simple communication. Known as Dovazul to those few mortals who have studied it, the dragon tongue is intrinsic to the very being of these creatures. When dragons speak, they do not merely make sounds that convey meaning. Their words carry power, shaping reality according to the will behind them. This is the thu'um, the storm voice, the voice itself, a form of magic so fundamental that it requires no gestures, no ingredients, no complex rituals. A dragon's voice is its weapon, its tool, its means of expressing dominance over the world around it. Each dragon bears a name composed of 3 words of power in their own language. Names that are not merely labels, but declarations of identity and achievement. These names tell the story of what each dragon has accomplished, what they represent, what they have become through ages of existence. Parthenax, whose name translates to ambition, overlord cruelty, carries a title that speaks to his complex history. Odahviing means snow hunter wing, marking him as a predator of the frozen skies. Even Alduin himself, the World Eater, bears a name that translates roughly to Destroyer Devour Master, a title befitting the most powerful of all dragonkind. The relationship between dragons and Akatosh remains a subject of theological debate among scholars. The Nord people believe dragons to be literal children of the dragon god of time, born from his divine essence. This belief finds support in the dragon's own references to Akatosh as father, as well as their apparent immortality. Dragons do not age in the way mortals understand aging. Though their physical forms may bear the marks of countless centuries, showing in tattered wings or broken horns, they remain fundamentally timeless beings. A dragon cannot die of old age, cannot sicken with disease, cannot be worn down by the mere passage of years. This immortality brings with it a perspective utterly foreign to mortal comprehension. Imagine existing for thousands upon thousands of years, watching civilizations rise and fall like waves upon a shore, seeing mountains worn down by wind and water, witnessing the slow dance of continental drift. Dragons remember times before humans walked Skyrim's frozen plains. They recall ages when the elves still dreamed of dominion over all Tamriel. They have seen empires bloom and wither, heroes rise and fall, and the endless cycle of mortal ambition play out across centuries. Yet immortality does not grant immunity to violence. Dragons can be slain in battle, their physical forms destroyed by blade or spell, or the thu'um itself turned against them. When a dragon dies through violence, something remarkable occurs. Their flesh remains, leaving behind bones and scales that can be harvested for their extraordinary properties, but their soul, the essential essence of what they are, does not simply dissipate. In the presence of another dragon or a dragonborn, that soul is absorbed, consumed, adding its knowledge and power to the one who claims it. This consumption of souls represents something primal in dragon nature. Dragons are creatures of dominance, beings whose fundamental instinct drives them to assert power over everything around them. When dragons engage in what appears to mortals as combat, they are actually conducting a deadly debate, a philosophical argument expressed through violence and the thu'um. The victor in such an exchange proves not merely physical superiority, but also the rightness of their perspective, the strength of their understanding, the dominance of their will. The physical capabilities of dragons match their mental prowess. A dragon in flight represents one of nature's most fearsome sights. Their wings, though seemingly too delicate to support their massive frames, propel them through the air with grace that belies their size. They can hover motionless over a battlefield, dive with the speed of a stooping hawk, or ride thermal currents for hours without tiring. Their claws can rend steel armor like parchment. Their tails can sweep aside multiple opponents with a single devastating blow. And always, always, there is their breath. Dragon breath represents the thu'um at its most elemental and destructive. Some dragons breathe fire so intense it can melt stone, reducing entire structures to slag and ash within moments. Others command frost so cold it can freeze a warrior solid in their armor, preserving them as an icy monument to draconic power. This is not simple exhalation of flame or frost, but rather the manifestation of their will made physical, the power of their voice given tangible, devastating form. The scales that armor a dragon's body possess properties that have made them among the most sought-after materials in all of Tamriel. Harder than steel, yet lighter than iron, dragon scale can turn aside the sharpest blade while allowing the wearer remarkable freedom of movement. Dragon bone, even denser and stronger than the scales, can be worked into weapons of extraordinary quality. These materials have commanded extraordinary prices throughout recorded history, though they remained vanishingly rare for most of Tamriel's existence, available only from the remains of dragons slain in ancient times. The blood of dragons holds even more remarkable properties, at least according to alchemical texts. Dragon blood can be used in potions of extraordinary potency, though the wise treat such ingredients with extreme caution. Ancient accounts speak of warriors who drank dragon blood seeking temporary access to the thu'um, or to strengthen their own voices with draconic power. Yet such attempts reportedly came with a terrible price, as dragon blood was said to burn from within, consuming the body of anyone foolish enough to consume it in significant quantities. Whether these accounts represent historical truth or cautionary folklore remains debated among scholars. Dragons possess one more trait that sets them apart from nearly all other creatures. They can sense each other across vast distances. When a dragon approaches another, they know. When a dragon falls in battle and their soul is consumed, other dragons feel the loss. This awareness creates an invisible network connecting all dragon kind, a web of perception that allows them to coordinate across distances that would make mortal communication impossible. This sense also extends to the dragonborn, those rare mortals who possess dragon souls within mortal flesh. Dragons recognize the dragonborn instinctively, sensing in them both kinship and threat, seeing them as simultaneously one of their own and an existential danger to dragonkind itself. The diet and behavior of dragons in their natural state remains poorly documented, for few mortals have observed dragons during times of peace. Some scholars theorize that dragons might sustain themselves through means other than physical food, perhaps drawing sustenance directly from the magical energies that permeate Nirn, though this remains speculative. What we know for certain is that dragons can and do consume physical prey. Accounts from the Dragon War era speak of dragons carrying off cattle, sheep, and occasionally humans. Though whether this represented true feeding behavior or simply an expression of dominance over the lesser creatures they ruled has never been conclusively determined. What is certain is that dragons require purpose. Left to their own devices with no challenges to face, no dominance to assert, no debates to conduct through violence, dragons can become listless, even melancholic. The dragon Numinex, imprisoned for decades in Dragon's Reach, grew so disturbed by his captivity that he eventually forgot even his own name, his identity eroding in the absence of the conflicts that defined draconic existence. This need for purpose, for meaning expressed through the assertion of will, would shape every interaction between dragons and the mortal races throughout history. Before the coming of humans to Skyrim, before the elves carved their kingdoms from the wilderness, dragons ruled unopposed. They soared over landscapes empty of civilization, hunted in skies untroubled by mortal ambitions, and lived lives that spanned ages without end. The world was theirs by right of power, by strength of will, by the simple fact that nothing could challenge their dominance. This era of unchallenged supremacy would not last forever, but while it endured, dragons embodied the very concept of natural sovereignty, beings whose right to rule required no justification beyond their own magnificent existence. The migration of mortals from Atmora would change everything. When humans first began to settle the frozen reaches of Skyrim, they brought with them the seeds of transformation that would reshape the relationship between dragons and the world. But in those early days, as the first ships crossed the Sea of Ghosts and the first settlements took root in hostile lands, dragons looked upon these newcomers with something between curiosity and contempt. Here were creatures so brief, so fragile, so weak. What threat could they possibly pose to the eternal supremacy of dragonkind? The answer to that question will be written in blood and fire across the centuries to come. the age of dragon dominion, the Merethic era, and the rise of the dragon cult. The Merethic era, that vast span of prehistory before humans developed writing to record their own stories, witnessed the establishment of an order that would define Skyrim for ages. When Isgramor and his followers arrived from Atmora, they brought with them religious beliefs centered on animal totems, seeing the divine expressed through the forms of earthly creatures. Among all these totems, the dragon stood supreme. This was not mere superstition or primitive worship of natural forces. The dragons of Skyrim were real, present, undeniably powerful. When early humans looked up and saw massive reptilian forms soaring through the northern sky, speaking with voices that could shatter stone, it required no great leap of faith to see divinity in such beings. The dragons, for their part, accepted this worship as their natural due. They were children of Akatosh, beings of immense power and apparently infinite lifespan. Why should they not be revered as gods by these brief, weak creatures who had come to live in their domain? Thus was born what would later be known as the dragon cult, though in those early days it was simply the natural order of the world. Dragons sat at the apex of a hierarchy that extended downward through layers of mortal authority. The humans who worshipped the dragons established elaborate temples and rituals to honor their scaled gods, built monuments that still dot Skyrim's landscape thousands of years later, and organized their entire society around service to draconic will. Yet dragons, for all their power and intelligence, had little interest in the tedious details of governance, managing mortal affairs, settling disputes between humans, organizing the collection of tribute, maintaining order among populations that reproduced and died with bewildering rapidity, held no appeal for beings whose thoughts moved on timescales measured in centuries. The dragons required intermediaries, mortals who could speak with their authority and translate their will into action. Enter the dragon priests. These were humans selected for their exceptional qualities, whether strength of will, magical aptitude, or simply absolute devotion to the dragons they served. The dragons granted them extraordinary powers, teaching them the thu'um itself, gifting them with masks of tremendous magical potency, and elevating them to positions of absolute authority over their fellow humans. The dragon priests became god kings in their own right, ruling their assigned territories with iron fists backed by both the power the dragons had granted them and the threat of draconic intervention if their authority was challenged. The city of Bromjunar, whose ruins would later be known as Labyrinthian, stood as the greatest center of dragon cult power during this era. Some scholars believe it served as the capital of Skyrim itself during the height of draconic dominion. Here, the most powerful dragon priests would gather to discuss matters of governance, to coordinate their efforts across the vast territory they controlled, and perhaps to receive direct instruction from the dragons themselves. The dragon priests ruled through a combination of genuine religious authority, magical power, and barely veiled threat. The common people believed, with considerable justification, that defying a dragon priest meant invoking the wrath of the dragons themselves. And indeed, when necessary, dragons would enforce the will of their priests with devastating effectiveness. A village that withheld tribute might find its buildings reduced to ash. A rebellious chieftain might be snatched away by massive claws, never to be seen again. The dragon priest demanded not merely obedience, but absolute submission. Each dragon priest wore a unique mask, a gift from their dragon masters that served as both symbol of office and repository of immense magical power. These masks, crafted from materials whose origin remains mysterious, bore enchantments that would be considered legendary even in later eras. Some granted the wearer enhanced magical abilities, allowing them to cast spells of devastating power with little effort. Others provided protection from various forms of attack, making the already formidable dragon priest nearly invulnerable in combat. Still others enhanced the thu'um, amplifying the voice of the priest wearing them. The names of some of these dragon priests have survived the centuries, preserved in ruins and ancient texts. Moroke, Croesus, Volsung, Ragod, Hevnorag, Vokun, Nakrin, and others ruled over their territories with absolute authority. Each had their own methods, their own interpretation of how best to serve their dragon masters and maintain order among the human population. Some were relatively benevolent rulers who saw their subjects as resources to be maintained. Others were tyrants who ruled through terror and casual cruelty. All were utterly devoted to the dragons they served, seeing their own authority as derived entirely from that service. The dragon cult enforced strict laws regarding language itself. The word dragon was taboo, forbidden to all except the dragons themselves and their priests. To speak this word without authorization was to commit blasphemy of the highest order, an offense that could result in immediate execution. This prohibition served multiple purposes. It reinforced the sacred nature of dragons, separating them linguistically from all other creatures. It demonstrated the power of the dragon priest to control even speech itself, and perhaps most importantly, it prevented the common people from discussing dragons openly, making organization of any resistance more difficult. Despite the oppressive nature of dragon cult rule, or perhaps because of it, civilization flourished during this era in certain ways. The dragon priests, whatever their other faults, understood the need for organization and infrastructure. Trade routes were established and protected. Disputes between settlements were resolved by priestly authority. Knowledge was gathered and preserved, particularly magical knowledge that might prove useful to the dragon priests in their service to the dragons. The physical monuments built during this era, the great temples and elaborately carved monuments, demonstrated both the organizational capacity of dragon cult society and the heavy price extracted from the common people to create such structures. At the pinnacle of this hierarchy stood Alduin, the World Eater, firstborn of Akatosh and mightiest of all dragons. Alduin's scales shone black as midnight. His voice could shake mountains. His very presence radiated power that made other dragons seem diminished by comparison. Where other dragons were content to rule their territories and accept the worship of mortals, Alduin claimed lordship over all dragons themselves. He was, in effect, the God King of God Kings, the supreme authority in a world ordered entirely around draconic supremacy. According to Nordic theology and certain draconic traditions, Alduin was created with a specific cosmic purpose. At the end of each kalpa, each cycle of existence, Alduin's destiny would call him to devour the world entirely, consuming all of existence so that a new kalpa could begin fresh and clean. This interpretation suggests that Alduin's role was not destruction for its own sake, but rather a necessary clearing away of the old to make room for the new. Whether this represents literal truth or theological interpretation, remains a matter of scholarly debate, but it helps explain what many saw as Alduin's deviation from his intended purpose. But Alduin, in the arrogance that comes from unchallenged power, turned away from this destiny. Why should he wait for the end of the Kalpa to assert his dominance? Why should he confine himself to the role of cosmic janitor, sweeping away existence at the appointed time? He possessed power beyond the comprehension of mortals and authority over all other dragons. The world was his to do with as he pleased, and what pleased him was rulership, dominion, the endless assertion of his will over everything that existed. This deviation from his destiny would have consequences that echoed across the ages. By choosing to rule rather than to consume, by asserting his authority as a god-king rather than accepting his role as destroyer, Alduin set in motion events that would eventually lead to catastrophe. For in making himself a ruler rather than a force of nature, he made himself vulnerable to the resentments that all rulers eventually inspire, whether dragon or mortal. Paarthurnax, Alduin's younger brother and lieutenant, served as his second in command during these ages. Where Alduin inspired fear through sheer overwhelming power, Paarthurnax commanded respect through a different means. His name, translating to ambition overlord cruelty, spoke to his nature during this period. He was Alduin's most trusted subordinate, his enforcer, his voice among the other dragons. When Alduin commanded, Paarthurnax ensured obedience. When lesser dragons questioned, Paarthurnax reminded them of the natural order. And when examples needed to be made, Paarthurnax made them with terrible efficiency. Paarthurnax taught other dragons mastery of the thu'um during this era, refining their ability to shape reality through voice alone. Under his instruction, dragons learned to use their voices not merely as weapons, but as tools of ever greater sophistication. This knowledge would later prove crucial, though in ways none could have anticipated during those early centuries of draconic rule. For generations stretching into centuries, for centuries stretching into millennia, this order persisted. Dragons ruled. Dragon priests governed in their name. The common people labored, worshipped, obeyed, and died, replaced by their children who inherited the same servitude. It must have seemed eternal, unchangeable, simply the way the world was and would always be. The dragons themselves surely saw it that way. After all, what could possibly challenge beings of such power? What could threaten creatures who commanded the voice itself, who could destroy armies with a word, who had time itself as their ally? The answer, when it came, arose not from superior strength, but from something the dragons had never anticipated: the will to resist despite hopeless odds, the choice to fight even when fighting seemed futile, the human capacity to endure suffering beyond reason and emerge still defiant. The seeds of rebellion were being sown in the suffering inflicted by the dragon cult, in the casual cruelties of the dragon priests, in every excess and every abuse of power. Those seeds would eventually sprout into a conflict that would shake Skyrim to its foundations and change the relationship between dragons and mortals forever. But in those early days of the Meretic era, such change remained unimaginable. The dragons soared supreme, their priests ruled with iron authority, and the world bent to draconic will. It was an age of apparent stability built upon a foundation of oppression, and like all such ages, it carried within it the forces that would eventually bring about its own destruction. Seeds of rebellion, the dragon cult's growing tyranny, As the Merethic era progressed, something began to change in the relationship between dragons, their priests, and the human populations that served them. What had begun as a religious order, humans worshipping beings they genuinely believed to be gods, gradually transformed into something darker and more oppressive. The dragon priests, granted immense power by their draconic masters, began to exercise that power with increasing cruelty. Perhaps it was inevitable. Power, as the saying goes, corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The dragon priests held authority that was absolute, backed by beings who could reduce entire settlements to ash. They answered to no mortal authority, faced no consequences for their actions against the people they ruled. If a priest decided to demand greater tribute from the villages under their authority, who could refuse? If they wished to conduct magical experiments that required unwilling subjects, who could deny them? If their rule became capricious, brutal, or simply indifferent to suffering, what recourse did the common people have? The answer, for a very long time, was none. The dragon priests ruled as they saw fit, and the people endured. Some priests were more benevolent than others, treating their subjects as valued resources to be maintained rather than expendable assets to be exploited. But even the best of them ruled with unquestioned authority, and the worst became tyrants whose cruelties are still recorded in the fragmentary histories that survived from that era. Human sacrifices became increasingly common as the dragon cult's power grew. Initially, these may have been willing offerings, devotees who sought to honor their dragon gods through the ultimate sacrifice. But as time passed and the priest demands increased, the line between voluntary martyrdom and ritual murder grew blurred and then disappeared entirely. Villages might be required to provide a certain number of victims for sacrifice, selected by lottery, or simply seized by armed warriors serving the dragon priests. These unfortunates would be brought to the great temples and offered up in the ceremonies designed to honor the dragons, though increasingly it seemed the ceremonies served more to demonstrate the priest's power than any genuine religious purpose. The tributes demanded from the common people became ever more burdensome. Food, materials, labor, all flowed toward the temples and the dragon priest's strongholds. Massive construction projects required thousands of workers laboring under harsh conditions. Agricultural production was organized not for the benefit of those doing the farming, but to meet quotas set by distant priests. Trade was regulated, taxed, and controlled to ensure that wealth concentrated in the hands of the cult, rather than the people who generated it. Those who showed potential for magical ability faced a particularly harsh fate. The dragon priests, ever seeking to expand their own power and maintain their monopoly on magical knowledge, would identify children with even minimal aptitude and take them from their families. Some of these children would be trained as lesser priests or servants of the cult. Others might be used in magical experiments. Still others simply disappeared into the temples, never to be seen again, their fate unknown even to their grieving parents. The dragons themselves remained largely aloof from these developments. They had granted authority to their priests and generally trusted them to exercise it appropriately. When individual dragons did interact directly with human populations, their priorities differed greatly from mortal concerns. A dragon might incinerate an entire village, not from malice, but from simple annoyance at being disturbed. Or they might ignore genuine atrocities committed by a dragon priest, seeing the suffering of brief mortal lives as beneath their notice. Yet not all dragons were entirely indifferent. Some, watching the growing oppression, felt stirrings of doubt about the system they had created. Was this truly the proper order of things? Did their dominion necessarily require such suffering? These doubts remained largely unspoken, for to question the established order was to question Alduin himself, and no dragon openly challenged the World Eater's authority. Among the human population, whispers of resistance began to circulate. In taverns, in markets, in fields during harvest time, people spoke in low voices about the growing tyranny. They shared stories of dragon priest excesses, of villages destroyed for failing to meet tribute demands, of children seized for purposes unknown. They remembered, or imagined they remembered, better times before the dragon cult's grip tightened so thoroughly around their lives. These whispers represented no organized resistance, not yet, merely the beginnings of a shared discontent. The dragon priest responded to any hint of resistance with overwhelming force. An example had to be made after all. A village that harbored someone who had spoken words of rebellion might find its entire population enslaved or executed. Those caught spreading seditious ideas could expect public torture before death, their suffering serving as warning to others. The cult maintained an extensive network of informants, ensuring that few rebellious words went unreported. This reign of terror succeeded in its immediate goal of preventing organized resistance, but it came at a cost. Every execution created martyrs. Every destroyed village generated refugees who spread tales of atrocity. Every child seized, every family destroyed, every casual cruelty inflicted by priests drunk on their own power added another name to the list of those who dreamed of freedom, even if they dared not act on those dreams. The dragons noticed none of this, or if they did, considered it beneath their concern. Human emotions, human suffering, human dreams of freedom meant nothing to beings who measured their resistance in ages. The dragon priests, for their part, believed themselves invulnerable. They commanded the voice. They wore masks of legendary power. They could call upon dragons themselves if threatened. What could mere common humans possibly do against such might? Meanwhile, the physical infrastructure of the dragon cult reached its peak. The great temples stood as monuments to draconic power, their architecture designed to inspire awe and terror in equal measure. Elaborate carvings covered their walls, depicting dragons in their terrible glory and humans prostrate before them. Word walls were erected throughout Skyrim, massive stone structures inscribed with the words of power in the dragon language. These walls served multiple purposes. They were religious monuments, demonstrations of the cult's power, and repositories of knowledge accessible only to those who understood the dragon tongue. The dragon priest developed increasingly sophisticated magical capabilities during this period. They delved into necromancy, learning to animate the dead to serve as tireless guardians. They explored soul magic, binding spirit to their will. They experimented with enchantments of extraordinary complexity, creating artifacts whose power would be legendary even thousands of years later. This pursuit of magical knowledge was not entirely without merit from a scholarly perspective, but the methods used often involved terrible suffering among unwilling subjects. Some dragon priests went even further, pursuing forms of immortality that would allow them to maintain their power indefinitely. Through dark rituals and forbidden magic, a few succeeded in transforming themselves into leeches, undead beings whose existence defied the natural order. They arranged for their followers to be entombed with them, establishing rituals that would sustain their unliving forms through the centuries. These followers, drained repeatedly of their life force to feed their master's unnatural existence, would eventually degenerate into the Draga, undead guardians that would haunt Nordic ruins for ages to come. The common people developed their own forms of resistance, subtle and small though they had to be. Songs were composed that spoke in carefully coded language about freedom and justice. Stories were told that celebrated heroes who stood against oppression, even if those heroes existed only in imagination. Religious practices developed that honored the old animal totems from before the dragon cult's dominance, maintaining connections to a time when dragons were not the supreme focus of worship. These tiny acts of cultural resistance preserve something precious, the memory that things had been different once and therefore might be different again. Trade routes stretched across Skyrim during this era, for even tyranny requires commerce. Merchants moving between settlements carried more than goods. They carried news, stories, ideas. A merchant who had witnessed a dragon priest cruelty in one location would speak of it in another. Tales of resistance, even failed resistance, spread this way. The network of trade became a network of information, slowly building connections between separated populations who shared common grievances. Then came the event that would change everything. Though few recognized it at the time, a dragon priest, emboldened by success in extending their control, made a mistake. The exact nature of this mistake has been lost to history. Perhaps they pushed too hard, demanded too much, visited cruelty once too often on people who had reached the limits of their endurance. Or perhaps it was simply timing, the spark landing in precisely the right place at the right moment to ignite tinder that had been accumulating for generations. Whatever the trigger, resistance began not as a grand uprising, but as small, isolated acts of defiance. A village that refused to provide the demanded tribute. A group of hunters who attacked and killed the warriors, serving a particularly cruel dragon priest. A burning temple whose flames might have been accident or arson. These were not coordinated acts of rebellion, not yet, but they represented something new. Active, resistance rather than passive endurance. The dragon priest moved to crush these sparks before they could spread, but the very act of crushing them created new grievances. The network of whispered dissent began to coalesce into something more dangerous. Shared understanding that resistance was possible, that others shared your hatred of draconic rule, that you were not alone in your desire for freedom. And then, in a development that would prove absolutely crucial to everything that followed, the dragon's greatest secret was stolen by those they considered beneath notice. Humans, weak and brief though they might be, began to learn the thu'um. The Dragon War. When mortals learn to roar. The exact circumstances of how humans first learned the thu'um remain a matter of debate among scholars and a source of contradictory accounts in the ancient legends. The Nords themselves credit Kine, the goddess of the storm and sky, who they say took pity on the suffering of humanity under draconic rule. According to these legends, Kine herself intervened, teaching mortals the dragon language and showing them how to use their own voices as weapons against their oppressors. Other accounts speak of theft, rather than gift, of clever humans who observed the dragons carefully and learned to mimic their speech, gradually understanding the power contained within the words. Still others suggest that some dragons, watching the tyranny of their kin with growing discomfort, might have shared knowledge that was meant to remain solely draconic. What matters less than how it happened is what it meant. For the first time in known history, mortals possessed a weapon that could harm dragons. The voice, when properly used, could strike with the force of a physical blow. It could render armor meaningless. It could even, with the right words and sufficient power, affect creatures as mighty as dragons themselves. The playing field, while still tilted heavily in favor of the dragons, had shifted slightly toward equilibrium. The first humans to master the thu'um became known as tongues, a title that would carry legendary status for generations. These pioneers faced incredible difficulties. Unlike dragons, for whom the voice was natural as breathing, humans had to learn painstakingly through years of meditation and practice. A single word of power might require months or years to master. 3 words combined into a proper shout represented the work of decades. And even then, a human tongue wielded the voice with far less power than even a young dragon could command naturally. But humans possess something dragons lacked: numbers and the willingness to cooperate against a common enemy. Where a single tongue might barely inconvenience a dragon, several working together could pose a genuine threat. Where one shout might be shrugged off, multiple shouts striking simultaneously could stagger even a powerful dragon. And humans could learn from each other, share knowledge, teach new generations, building on the foundation laid by those who came before. The dragon cult attempted to suppress this knowledge with characteristic brutality. Any human caught attempting to learn or practice the voice faced immediate execution, often preceded by torture designed both to extract information about other potential tongues and to serve as warning to others. Entire villages suspected of harboring tongues might be destroyed. Dragon priests used their own mastery of the voice to hunt down these dangerous rebels, engaging in deadly duels that demonstrated the terrible power humans had learned to wield. Yet suppression proved impossible. The knowledge spread too quickly, passed from master to student in hidden places, practiced in remote locations far from dragon cult authorities. For every tongue the cult killed, 2 more emerged to take their place. The genie, as it were, was out of the bottle and could not be forced back in. Then came Parthenax's betrayal, an event so significant that it would be remembered and debated for thousands of years. Parthenax, Alduin's own brother and lieutenant, the dragon who had taught other dragons mastery of the thu'um, turned against the established order and sided with the human rebels. The exact reasons for this betrayal remain mysterious. Parthenax himself, in later years, would claim that he was moved by Alduin's false claim to godhood, by his brother's deviation from his destined purpose. Nordic legend insists that Cain commanded Parthenax to aid humanity, that divine will overrode his draconic nature. Some scholars suggest a more complex motivation. Perhaps Parthenax, ancient and wise even among dragons, foresaw the disaster that Alduin's tyranny would bring to all dragonkind, and sought to prevent it even at the cost of seeming to betray his own kind. Whatever his motivations, Parthenax's actions were unequivocal. He approached the human resistance and offered not merely allegiance but knowledge. He taught humans to use the voice with far greater sophistication than they had managed through observation and experimentation alone. Under his instruction, the most gifted tongues achieved mastery that approached, though never quite equaled, the power that dragons wielded naturally. 3 humans in particular became legendary through Parthenax's teaching: Hakon One Eye, Feldir the Old, and Gormley Golden Hilt. These 3 would become the first mortal masters of the voice, tongues so powerful that their names echo through Nordic legend to this day. Their journey from resistance fighters to legendary heroes paralleled the transformation of scattered human resistance into organized war. Parthenax was not the only dragon to side with humanity. His betrayal inspired or enabled others to question the established order. Some dragons, perhaps moved by conscience or calculation, joined the rebellion. Their numbers remained small compared to those who stayed loyal to Alduin, but their impact proved enormous. Dragon against dragon, the skies of Skyrim became battlegrounds where massive reptilian forms clashed with the fury of thunderstorms, their voices shaking the mountains and their blood raining down upon the earth below. The Dragon War proper, as opposed to the earlier scattered resistance, began when human populations across Skyrim rose in coordinated rebellion. What had been individual acts of defiance became organized military campaigns. Villages that had suffered under dragon cult rule banded together into armies. Tongues, no longer hiding their abilities, led warriors into battle against the dragon priests who had oppressed them for so long. The war devastated Skyrim. Dragons, when threatened, unleashed their full destructive potential. Entire settlements vanished beneath torrents of flame or frost. The dragon priests, fighting for their positions and their lives, used all the magical power at their disposal. Armies of humans and Draugr clashed in bloody battles. The sky filled with smoke from burning buildings. The ground ran red with the blood of humans and the darker, more viscous blood of dragons. Yet the humans kept fighting. For every warrior who fell, another took up arms. For every tongue killed in battle, 2 more students reached the level of mastery needed to join the fight. The dragons, accustomed to easy dominance, found themselves in a war of attrition against enemies who refused to surrender regardless of the cost. The tide of war turned gradually but inexorably against the dragons. Parthenax's defection dealt them both a strategic blow and a psychological one. If even Alduin's own brother could abandon the cause, what did that say about the righteousness of draconic rule? Other dragons, witnessing the determined human resistance and the terrible casualties on both sides, began to question whether the war could be won, even if it should be. The dragon cult itself began to fracture. Some dragon priests, seeing their power base crumbling, attempted to negotiate with the rebels or simply fled their territories. Others fought to the bitter end, their loyalty to their dragon masters unshakable even in the face of certain defeat. Still others, the most powerful and prideful, retreated to hidden strongholds where they established themselves as independent powers, neither fully part of the cult nor entirely abandoned by the dragons. The humans developed tactics specifically designed to fight dragons. They learned that a dragon forced to land was far more vulnerable than one free to stray from the sky. They discovered where scales were weakest, what angles offered the best chance to strike vital areas. They created weapons specifically designed to harm dragons, blades enchanted with magic powerful enough to pierce draconic hide. Most importantly, they learned to work together, coordinating their attacks to bring down foes that no individual human could hope to defeat alone. But despite all their victories, despite the growing momentum of human resistance, one terrible fact remained. Alduin himself had not been defeated. The World Eater, mightiest of all dragons, continued to lead the draconic forces. His power exceeded that of other dragons as much as a dragon's power exceeded a mortal's. His voice could shatter armies. His very presence on the battlefield turned the tide of combat. While Alduin remained, complete victory remained impossible. The three legendary heroes trained by Paarthurnax to the peak of mortal capability with the voice understood that defeating Alduin required more than conventional combat. They needed a weapon specifically designed to harm dragons in a way that no physical blade could match. They needed a shout built not from observations of dragon combat or teachings from Paarthurnax, but from something uniquely human, their own mortality. Dragons are immortal beings. They do not age. They do not sicken. They die only through violence, and even then their souls persist, capable of being absorbed by other dragons or by Dragonborn. Dragons know power, dominance, will, but they do not and cannot understand mortality. The very concept of an existence that ends, a life measured in decades rather than ages, remains alien to their comprehension. The three heroes created a shout that weaponized this gap in understanding. Dragonrend, they called it, words of power that forced the concept of mortality onto any dragon who heard them. It did not kill directly. It did not wound the body. Instead, it wounded the mind and soul, forcing an immortal being to confront his own potential end, overwhelming it with a concept its nature fundamentally rejected. When Dragonrend struck a dragon, the creature would be forced to land, its wings failing as its consciousness struggled to process the impossible concept that had been thrust upon it. For crucial moments, the dragon would be vulnerable, grounded, unable to use the greatest advantage its kind possessed. In those moments, mortal warriors could strike, and strike they did. Armed with this terrible new weapon, the three heroes prepared for the confrontation that would decide the war's outcome. They lured Alduin to the peak of the throat of the world, the highest mountain in all of Skyrim, a place sacred to dragons. There, at the summit where the world itself seemed to touch the sky, the final battle of the Dragon War would be fought. The battle that followed has been immortalized in legend, carved into stone on Alduin's wall, and passed down through generations in story and song. Gormley Goldenhilt, fierce and fearless, struck first with her blade, while her voice rang out with the power of the thu'um. Hakon One Eye, scarred veteran of countless battles, matched his shout with hers, their combined voices stunning even Alduin momentarily. Feldir the Old, wisest of the three, directed their assault with tactical precision born of long experience. Even with Dragonrend, even with three of the most powerful tongues in history working in perfect coordination, Alduin proved almost impossible to defeat. His power was simply too great. He shrugged off wounds that would have killed lesser dragons. His own voice countered theirs with force that sent them reeling. The battle raged across the mountaintop, stone shattering beneath claws and voice alike, blood freezing before it could stain the snow. Gormley fell first, her courage finally overcome by Alduin's fury. Her death bought time for the others, time measured in heartbeats but absolutely crucial. Hakon, wounded and exhausted, poured everything remaining into one final use of Dragonren, forcing Alduin to land one last time. And Feldir, who had been preparing throughout the battle, enacted a plan so desperate it might well have failed. He used an Elder Scroll. The Elder Scrolls are artifacts of incomprehensible power, fragments of creation itself that exist outside normal time. To read one is to see possibility and prophecy intertwined, to witness events that have not yet occurred but might occur, to look upon the fundamental structure of reality itself. Most who attempt to read an Elder Scroll go mad or blind. Feldir had spent years learning to safely read the one they had obtained, and in that moment atop the throat of the world, he read it with purpose and precision. The Elder Scroll did not kill Alduin. Instead, it cast him forward through time itself, hurling the World Eater out of his own era and into an unknown future. Feldir and Hakon could not know where or when Alduin would emerge from the time stream, but they had succeeded in removing him from their present. Without their leader, without the World Eater's terrible presence to rally them, the remaining dragons loyal to Alduin lost heart. The aftermath of the Dragon War reshaped Skyrim and established patterns that would persist for thousands of years. The dragons, defeated and leaderless, scattered. Some fled to remote regions where humans rarely ventured. Others went into hiding, concealing themselves in places where they might escape notice. A few, recognizing the futility of continued resistance, actually surrendered to human authority, accepting imprisonment or restriction in exchange for their lives. The dragon cult, stripped of its draconic support, collapsed. Most dragon priests were hunted down and killed by vengeful humans who remembered generations of oppression. Those who survived did so by going into hiding, retreating to their strongholds, and sealing themselves away with elaborate protections. Many used their mastery of necromancy and dark magic to extend their existence beyond natural death, becoming undead horrors that would haunt their tombs for millennia. Yet the dragon cult did not entirely vanish. Remnants persisted, true believers who continued to worship dragons and await their return. These remnants built the dragon burial mounds that still dot Skyrim's landscape, entombing the remains of dragons who had fallen in the war. They believed, correctly as it would turn out, that one day Alduin would return and resurrect the dragons entombed in these mounds. When that day came, the faithful would be rewarded for their devotion. The Draugr who guarded these mounds and the ruins of dragon cult temples were the descendants of these believers, drained of life force through dark rituals, but sustained by their dedication to eventually serve the dragons again. The knowledge of the thu'um having proven itself in war became central to Nordic culture. The tongues who had led the resistance against the dragons became heroes and chieftains. Their ability to wield the voice granted them authority and respect that would persist for generations. But even in victory, questions arose about how the thu'um should be used. During the centuries following the Dragon War, Nords continued to use the voice as a weapon. Nord warriors learned the thu'um and wielded it in battle against their enemies. The great conquerors who expanded Nordic territory across Tamriel were tongues, who combined martial prowess with the power of the voice. For a time, it seemed that humans had simply taken the place of dragons as rulers through force, using the same weapon that had overthrown their former masters. Then came Jurgen Windcaller, a tongue who participated in the Battle of Red Mountain, where a Nord army suffered catastrophic defeat despite being led by powerful tongues. Jurgen, disturbed by this failure, spent 7 years in meditation seeking to understand how strong voices could fail. His conclusion would reshape Nordic use of the thu'um fundamentally. Jurgen emerged from his meditation with a philosophy that became known as the way of the voice. He taught that the thu'um was a gift from Kain, meant for worship and praise of the gods, rather than a weapon for conquest. To use the voice frivolously or for personal ambition was to dishonor that gift. Only in times of true need, when no other option remained, should the thu'um be used in combat. This philosophy gained followers who became the greybeards, monks who withdrew from the world to study and perfect their mastery of the voice through meditation and spiritual discipline. They established High Hrothgar, a monastery built near the peak of the throat of the world, in the same place where Alduin had been defeated. There they would meditate, study, and maintain their abilities while waiting for times of true need to call them back into the world. The greybeards spoke only in the most exceptional circumstances, for their voices had grown so powerful through meditation that even normal speech could cause destruction. When they did speak to summon someone to High Hrothgar, their voice could be heard across all of Skyrim, a summons that could not be ignored or denied. Parthenax, the dragon who had made the hero's victory possible, took up residence at the very peak of the throat of the world, above even High Hrothgar. There he became master of the greybeards, teaching them and guiding their understanding of the way of the voice. For millennia, he would maintain this vigil, a dragon who had overcome his own nature through meditation and philosophy, waiting for the day when Alduin would return and the world would need his wisdom once more. The Dragon War ended not with complete extermination of dragonkind, but with an uneasy peace. Dragons survived but remained hidden, watching and waiting. Humans reigned supreme in Skyrim, but they had paid a terrible price for their freedom and knew that their victory depended partly on luck and partly on the aid of a dragon who had turned against his own kind. The voice remained, a reminder of both the terrible power of dragons and humanity's capacity to resist even the most overwhelming force. And somewhere in the time stream cast forward by an Elder Scroll, Alduin waited. The World Eater had been defeated but not destroyed. One day, the prophecy said, he would return. One day, dragons would rise again. One day, the world would need heroes who could stand against draconic might, just as those ancient tongues had done. That day seemed impossibly far in the future, a problem for generations yet unborn. For now, Skyrim could rebuild. The temples of the dragon cult stood as ruins, monuments to a tyranny overthrown. The burial mounds remained, sealed and guarded, awaiting a return that might never come. Dragons became legend, stories told to children to teach them about courage and resistance. The world moved on, forgetting that the greatest threats are often those that lie dormant, waiting for their moment to return. The long sleep. Dragons fade from history. With Alduin's banishment and the defeat of the dragon cult, dragons entered a period that scholars would later call the Great Diminishment. The mighty creatures who had once ruled Skyrim as undisputed masters now found themselves reduced to fugitives, hiding in the furthest reaches of the world to avoid the wrath of humans who had every reason to seek their extinction. Some dragons fled far beyond Skyrim's borders, seeking refuge in lands where humans held less power, or where the memory of the Dragon War had not penetrated. The mountains of High Rock, the wilderness of Hammerfell, even the distant reaches beyond Tamriel itself saw occasional dragon sightings during this period. These creatures kept to the most remote areas, avoiding settlements and carefully concealing themselves from mortal eyes whenever possible. Within Skyrim itself, those dragons who remained alive chose isolation over confrontation. They made their lairs in the highest mountains, in the deepest caves, in places where humans rarely ventured, and where a dragon might exist for years without being discovered. Some settled near dragon burial mounds, as if drawn to be near the remains of their fallen kin. Others sought places of natural power, locations where the barriers between Mundus and other realms grew thin, perhaps hoping to draw strength from such sites. The few dragons who accepted some form of accommodation with human society did so on very limited terms. Numenex, a dragon whose name translates to God of Hunt Stag, accepted imprisonment in Dragon's Reach, the great palace in Whiterun. This was not imprisonment in the sense of chains or bars, but rather a binding created by the building itself. Architectural features specifically designed to prevent a dragon from leaving. Numenex could fly freely within the Great Hall, but could not exit it. Parthenax would later recall visiting Numenex during his captivity. The imprisoned dragon's mind had deteriorated from isolation and inactivity to the point where he could not even remember his own name. This fate illustrates something crucial about dragon nature. They require purpose, challenge, the ability to assert their will. Deprived of these things, even an immortal mind can decay. Most dragons simply vanished from mortal awareness entirely. Humans living in Skyrim grew up knowing dragons only as stories their grandparents told. The massive bones occasionally found in remote locations were attributed to ancient battles or explained as the remains of creatures from mythological times. The idea that dragons might still exist, alive and active, seemed no more credible than claims that giants walked the earth or that elves built cities of gold beneath the sea. Yet dragons did not merely hide and wait passively. Some used the long centuries to pursue their own interests in isolation. They could study the mysteries of magic without interruption, meditate on the nature of the voice, or simply exist in contemplation of timeless questions that mortal minds could not grasp. For immortal beings, a few centuries of solitude represented no great burden. They had time. They could afford to wait. The First Era brought new threats to dragons that proved, in some ways, more dangerous than the armies of Nords who had opposed them during the Dragon War. The Taishi, a mysterious race from the distant continent of Akavir, invaded Tamriel during the First Era. The Taishi had a particular hatred of dragons, or perhaps more accurately, a particular obsession with hunting them. They called themselves dragon eaters, and brought with them martial arts and weapons specifically designed for killing dragons. The Chaishti formed an organization called the Dragon Guard, dedicated to hunting down and exterminating dragons wherever they could be found. These warriors were highly skilled, extremely determined, and possessed knowledge of draconic habits and weaknesses accumulated over generations. When the Dragon Guard began their systematic hunt through Tamriel, already reduced numbers of dragons diminished further. Dragons who had survived the Dragon War and the subsequent human vengeance now faced elite hunters specifically trained to kill their kind. The impact of the Dragon Guard's campaign cannot be understated. They succeeded in killing numerous dragons across Tamriel, reducing an already diminished population to near extinction. Dragons who might have considered emerging from hiding decided instead to burrow deeper into their isolated refuges. Some fled Tamriel entirely, seeking safety in other lands where the Dragon Guard's reach might not extend. Yet the Dragon Guard's purpose would eventually transform in an unexpected way. When Raymond Cyrodiil revealed himself to be Dragonborn, possessing the soul of a dragon in a mortal body, the Dragon Guard recognized in him something worthy of their service. They transitioned from hunters of dragons to protectors of the Dragonborn, eventually becoming the organization known as the Blades. This transformation did not mean they ceased hunting dragons entirely, but their primary focus shifted to serving the Dragonborn emperors of the Riemann and later Septim dynasties. During the Second Era, dragons had become so rare that most people considered them extinct. Scholars debated whether dragons had ever truly existed, or were merely legendary creatures whose reality had been exaggerated in ancient tales. The few reliable accounts of dragon sightings were separated by decades or even centuries. Each new sighting became a sensation precisely because it seemed to violate the established understanding that dragons were gone forever. The dragon cult's remnants maintained their vigil during all these centuries, waiting in their tombs for Alduin's prophesied return. The Draga who guarded dragon burial mounds and ancient temples continued their eternal watch, animated by dark magic and sustained through rituals that drained them of their humanity. These undead guardians killed any who dared enter their domains, not out of malice, but from simple devotion to their long-dead masters. They protected the remains of dragons buried in the mounds, ensuring that when the time came for resurrection, the physical remains would be intact and ready. Some scholars of the Second Era did maintain interest in dragons and draconic history. They studied the ruins of dragon cult temples, documented the locations of dragon burial mounds, and preserved what knowledge they could about these creatures. The Atlas of Dragons, compiled during this period, represented one of the more comprehensive attempts to catalogue dragon lairs and burial sites. Such scholarly work was motivated partly by historical interest and partly by practical concern. If dragons did somehow return, future generations would need knowledge of where they had been and what they were capable of. The dragon language remained accessible to scholars, though few could actually speak it. The word walls scattered throughout Skyrim still bore their inscriptions, carved deeply into stone and preserved against the erosion of time. Ambitious students of the voice might spend their entire lives learning a single word from these walls, for without a dragon to unlock the meaning, mortal learning of the thu'um remained painfully slow. The Greybeards maintained their tradition of meditation and study, but they shared their knowledge sparingly and only with those they deemed worthy. Legends and prophecies from this period hinted at Dragon's eventual return. The most significant of these was the prophecy inscribed on Alduin's wall, an elaborate carved monument located in Skyhaven Temple. This ancient Akaviri construction depicted the Dragon War, Alduin's banishment, and the prophecy of his return. According to this prophecy, Alduin would eventually emerge from the time stream where he had been cast. When he did, the world would need a hero to stand against him, a dragonborn capable of matching the World Eater's power. The last dragonborn, according to prophecy, would not merely be another mortal with the ability to use the thu'um through long training. They would possess the soul of a dragon within a mortal body, able to absorb dragon souls and learn words of power instantly, rather than through years of meditation. This dragonborn would be Alduin's opposite and equal, the one being capable of truly defeating the World Eater, rather than merely banishing him again. Such prophecies meant little to the common people of Tamriel during the Second and Third eras. Dragons were myth, Alduin was legend, and the idea that either would return seemed no more credible than any other ancient tale. Life went on, empires rose and fell, and the long centuries of peace from draconic threat convinced most that dragons were safely relegated to history. Even the Blades, descended from the dragon god and theoretically dedicated to opposing dragons, devoted most of their efforts to other concerns. They served the dragonborn emperors, gathering intelligence, conducting covert operations, protecting imperial interests. Their extensive knowledge of dragons gathered over generations remained dormant, preserved in their archives but rarely consulted. The organization maintained only a skeleton presence in Skyrim by the end of the Third Era, with most of their forces concentrated in Cyrodiil. The fall of the Septim dynasty at the end of the Third Era left the Blades without a dragonborn emperor to serve. The organization fragmented, its members scattered, its purpose uncertain. By the early Fourth Era, the Blades existed more as scattered individuals maintaining old traditions than as a coherent organization. This dissolution would prove tragically unfortunate timing, for the era of peace was ending. Dragons would return, and when they did, Tamriel would be far less prepared to face them than it had been in ancient days. Yet Parthenax maintained his vigil at the peak of the throat of the world, meditating on the way of the voice, overcoming his draconic nature through philosophy and discipline. He knew what others had forgotten. Alduin would return. The World Eater's banishment was temporary by its very nature. Time moved forward, inexorably, carrying Alduin with it toward the moment when he would emerge from the time stream and return to Skyrim. When that day came, the world would need heroes capable of standing against draconic might. The dragon burial mounds waited too, scattered across Skyrim's landscape, their contents preserved by dragon cult magic and Draga guardians. The bones of fallen dragons rested in these mounds, neither truly destroyed nor capable of resurrection without Alduin's power. They were in a state of suspension, waiting for the moment when the World Eater would speak the words that would call them back to life. And somewhere in the fabric of time itself, Alduin existed in a state between moments, cast forward from the Dragon War era, but not yet emerged into any specific future. He experienced nothing during this time-lost state, perceived nothing, remained conscious of nothing, but the time stream carried him onward, moving toward the future like a river flowing toward the sea. Eventually, that river would deposit him in a new era, far from the time and place where Feldir the Old had cast him away. When that happened, when Alduin returned to Skyrim, everything would change once more. The stage was being set for the events of the Fourth Era, though none of the players knew it yet. Dragons slumbered in distant hiding places, or rested as bones in burial mounds. Humans went about their lives, building cities, fighting wars, pursuing their brief mortal concerns. The Blades scattered and weakened. The Greybeards meditated in their mountain monastery. And somewhere, someone was being born who would possess a dragon's soul in human flesh. The last dragonborn prophesied to stand against Alduin's return. The long sleep of dragons was nearing its end. The Dragon Crisis. Alduin's return in the Fourth Era. The Fourth Era began with the Oblivion Crisis and the fall of the Septim Dynasty, events that reshaped the political landscape of Tamriel. The Empire, weakened by these catastrophes, struggled to maintain control over its provinces. Skyrim itself descended into civil war, with the Stormcloaks rebelling against imperial rule over religious and political grievances. The province was divided, distracted, its attention focused inward on its own conflicts rather than on ancient threats that everyone assumed were safely dead and buried. None of this mortal turmoil mattered to Alduin as he emerged from the time wound atop the throat of the world in 4E 201. For him, no subjective time had passed since Feldir used the Elder Scroll to cast him into the time stream. One moment he was battling the three heroes. The next, he found himself thrust into a world transformed, thousands of years distant from the era he had known. The first thing Alduin encountered in this new age was Paarthurnax, his own brother, perched at the summit of the mountain where the World Eater had been banished so long ago. The reunion was not warm. Paarthurnax had spent millennia meditating on the way of the voice, overcoming his draconic nature, becoming something his brother could barely recognize. Alduin offered Paarthurnax a chance to rejoin him, to reclaim his place as lieutenant and help rebuild the draconic dominion they had once shared. Paarthurnax refused. He had changed too much, learned too much, grown beyond what he had been during the Dragon War era. The philosophy he had developed and taught to the Greybeards represented a complete rejection of everything Alduin stood for. The gulf between the brothers had grown too wide to bridge. Alduin noted that his brother had grown weak and left him there, descending from the mountain to begin his campaign of resurrection and revenge. Alduin's first priority was rebuilding his army. The dragons who had survived the Dragon War and hidden themselves during the long millennia remained scattered and cautious, but dragons who had fallen in battle, whose remains rested in burial mounds across Skyrim, could be restored through Alduin's unique power. The World Eater flew from mound to mound, speaking words of power in the dragon language that brought dead dragons back to life. The resurrection process itself was dramatic and terrible to witness. Alduin would land at a dragon burial mound and use a unique shout that called forth the dead dragon's soul and restored its body. A cylinder of purple light would erupt from the earth, reaching toward the sky. The ground would shake. Then, with a roar that echoed across the landscape, a fully restored dragon would burst from the burial mound, alive and ready to serve Alduin once more. These resurrected dragons retained their memories from before death, including their experience of the Dragon War and their defeat at human hands. They emerged angry, humiliated, eager to reclaim the dominance they had lost. Alduin promised them a new era of draconic rule, a chance to put humanity back in its proper place. Most of the resurrected dragons joined his cause eagerly, though a few would eventually defect when they witnessed the Dragonborn's power. The return of dragons caught Skyrim completely unprepared. Alduin's first attack, before he began his resurrection campaign, struck the town of Helgen during what should have been a routine execution of captured Stormcloaks. The World Eater descended on the town without warning, reducing it to ruins within minutes. Buildings collapsed beneath the force of his voice. Fires spread rapidly. The carefully organized execution dissolved into chaos as both Imperial soldiers and Stormcloak prisoners fled for their lives. Among those who escaped Helgen that day was a prisoner whose presence there had been almost accidental. This individual, caught crossing the border at the wrong time, had been swept up in the Imperial Legion's capture of Ulfric Stormcloak and scheduled for execution alongside the Stormcloak rebels. Alduin's attack gave them a chance to escape, though they had no idea why this massive black dragon had appeared or what its presence meant for Skyrim's future. As dragons began appearing across Skyrim, the population reacted with shock and terror. Dragons were supposed to be extinct, relegated to myth and legend. Suddenly, they were strafing towns with frost and flame, attacking travelers on the roads, making their presence impossible to ignore. The Jarls of Skyrim's various holds found themselves facing a threat their guards were utterly unprepared to handle. Conventional weapons could wound dragons but rarely kill them. Magic users capable of truly threatening a dragon remained rare, and the dragons, emboldened by Alduin's return and their own resurrections, showed little fear of human resistance. The prisoner who escaped Helgen would soon prove to be far more significant than anyone could have guessed. When a dragon attacked the watchtower outside Whiterun, this individual joined the guards in defense of the town. During the battle against the dragon Mirmulnir, something extraordinary happened. After killing the dragon, the individual absorbed its soul, experiencing a rush of knowledge and power as the dragon's essence became part of them. This marked the revelation that the escaped prisoner was dragonborn, the prophesied hero who possessed a dragon soul within mortal flesh. The Greybeards, sensing this event from their monastery at High Hrothgar, summoned the dragonborn with a shout that echoed across all of Skyrim. This was the first time the Greybeards had spoken to summon someone since Tiber Septim himself had walked to High Hrothgar centuries earlier. The Dragonborn's ability to absorb dragon souls provided something crucial that Skyrim desperately needed: a way to permanently kill dragons. When the Dragonborn slew a dragon and absorbed its soul, that dragon could not be resurrected again. This was why the last Dragonborn had been prophesied. They alone possessed the power to ensure that dragons stayed dead once defeated. Not everyone welcomed the revelation that dragons had returned. The Blades, whose organizational structure had collapsed with the fall of the Septim dynasty, suddenly found renewed purpose. Delphine and Esbern, two of the last surviving Blades, emerged from hiding to help the Dragonborn understand the threat and coordinate a response. They possessed knowledge about dragons that had been preserved in Blade's archives for generations, including the location of Alduin's Wall and the prophecy it depicted. The civil war between Imperial forces and Stormcloaks complicated the response to the dragon threat. Both sides recognized that dragons posed a danger, but neither was willing to set aside their conflict to focus on the crisis. Armies that should have been hunting dragons remained committed to fighting each other. Resources that could have gone toward preparing defenses against dragon attacks went instead to the civil war. The Dragonborn found themselves navigating not just the physical danger of fighting dragons, but the political complexity of a divided Skyrim. Alduin's campaign of resurrection proceeded methodically across Skyrim. He raised Sarlacnir from his burial mound near Kynesgrove. Witnesses reported seeing Alduin revive dragon after dragon, sometimes multiple in a single day. The sky, which had been free of dragons for thousands of years, now regularly saw massive reptilian forms soaring between towns and mountains. Dragon lairs that had stood empty since the Dragon War became active again, with living dragons returning to claim them as territory. The dragons varied in their strength and abilities. Some were relatively young and inexperienced, possessing basic abilities and limited combat experience. Others were ancient beings who had participated in the Dragon War itself, emerging from their resurrection with millennia of knowledge and power. Elder dragons, ancient dragons, and even more powerful varieties began appearing as Alduin raised the mightiest of his fallen kin. Some dragons use frost breath, exhaling blasts of cold so intense they could freeze a warrior solid in seconds. Others breathe fire that reduce wood to ash and turn stone red hot. Certain dragons possessed unique abilities beyond standard breath weapons, such as the capacity to drain the life force from their enemies or use specific thu'um shouts to devastating effect. Each dragon posed a unique challenge requiring different tactics to defeat. Named dragons became known across Skyrim as the Dragon Crisis intensified. Vuljotnark guarded ancient ruins. Volthuriel lurked in the depths of Blackreach, an ancient cavern system, where it had remained hidden even during the height of the Dragon War. Vinteruth and Crucikrell served Mirak, the first Dragonborn, in his realm within Hermaeus Mora's Oblivion Plane. Each had their own personality, their own level of loyalty to Alduin, their own approach to the new world they found themselves in. Not all dragons remained loyal to Alduin. Paarthurnax, of course, continued to oppose his brother from his perch atop the throat of the world. Odarving, a dragon who had been one of Alduin's strongest supporters, eventually submitted to the last Dragonborn after being defeated in single combat. He recognized in the Dragonborn a power that matched or exceeded Alduin's, and draconic nature compelled him to acknowledge superior strength when he encountered it. The Dragonborn's journey took them across Skyrim, learning words of power from ancient word walls, gaining strength through absorbing dragon souls, slowly assembling the knowledge and ability needed to confront Alduin himself. The Greybeards provided training in the way of the voice. Paarthurnax shared crucial knowledge about Dragonrend and Alduin's nature. The Blades contributed their historical knowledge and helped locate important artifacts and locations. The revelation of Dragonrend's existence proved crucial. The ancient Shout, created specifically to harm dragons by forcing the concept of mortality upon them, had been lost when the three heroes who created it died. But through using an Elder Scroll at the Time Wound atop the throat of the world, the Dragonborn was able to witness the original confrontation between Alduin and the ancient heroes, learning Dragonrend by observing its use across the barrier of time itself. Alduin eventually learned of the Dragonborn's growing power and sought to confront this threat before it could mature further. Multiple battles between the World Eater and the last Dragonborn demonstrated the prophesied hero's growing mastery of the thu'um and ability to stand against even the mightiest of dragons. Each confrontation ended with Alduin retreating, but he was clearly weakening, his confidence shaken by facing an opponent who could match his power. The final confrontation would not take place in Skyrim at all. Alduin, seeking to recover his strength, fled to Sovngarde, the Nordic afterlife, where the souls of honored dead warriors feast in the Hall of Shore. There, Alduin had been consuming the souls of the dead themselves, drawing power from the essence of heroes who had earned their place in the afterlife. This violation of the natural order offended even those dragons who might otherwise have been neutral regarding Alduin's return. The Dragonborn, with Odahving's help, reached Skuldafn, an ancient Nordic temple guarded by the dragon priest Nakreen. From there, using a portal that connected to Sovngarde itself, the Dragonborn entered the Nordic afterlife in pursuit of Alduin. In Sovngarde, the Dragonborn found not only Alduin, but also the spirits of the three ancient heroes who had originally banished him: Gormle Golden Hilt, Hakon One-Eye, and Feldir the Old. With the aid of these legendary heroes, the Dragonborn engaged Alduin in a final battle at the Hall of Valor. The fight raged across the mystical landscape of Sovngarde, shaking the very foundations of the afterlife. The three ancient heroes used Dragonren to ground Alduin repeatedly, while the Dragonborn struck with weapon and voice alike. Slowly, inevitably, Alduin weakened. His body bore wounds that would not heal. His voice grew less powerful. His movements became slower. Finally, with one last defiant roar, Alduin fell. But something unprecedented occurred. The Dragonborn did not absorb Alduin's soul. Instead, the World Eater's essence seemed to dissolve, not destroyed, but rather dissipating into some other realm or state of being. This ambiguous end has led to much speculation. Paarthurnax suggested that Alduin might not be truly dead, that he might one day return to fulfill his original purpose of devouring the world at the end of the Kalpa. Whether this represents hope or warning, and whether Alduin's return would come in the near future or at some unimaginably distant time, remains unknown. What is certain is that the immediate threat had been vanquished. The aftermath of the Dragon Crisis left Skyrim transformed. Dragons remained active across the province, though without Alduin's leadership, they were less coordinated and less aggressive. Some continued to attack human settlements and travelers. Others withdrew to remote lairs, apparently content to exist without actively seeking conflict. A few actively sought peace with mortals, recognizing that the Dragonborn's victory over Alduin established a new order where cooperation might serve them better than conflict. Paarthurnax attempted to teach surviving dragons the way of the voice, hoping to help them overcome their domineering nature through philosophy and meditation as he had done. Some dragons showed interest in this path, though Odahving expressed skepticism that many would follow it successfully. The challenges facing dragons attempting to live peacefully among mortals were immense. Their nature compelled them toward dominance. Humans remembered millennia of oppression, and trust remained elusive on both sides. The Blades presented the Dragonborn with a controversial demand. They wanted Paarthurnax killed. Despite his crucial aid in defeating Alduin, despite millennia of meditation and teaching the way of the voice, the Blades could not forget his role in the Dragon War when he served as Alduin's lieutenant. They argued that his betrayal of Alduin proved he was capable of betrayal, and therefore could not be trusted. The Dragonborn faced a difficult choice: honor the Blades' request and kill one of their most important allies, or refuse and create a permanent breach with the descendants of the ancient Dragon Guard. The political situation in Skyrim remained complex. The civil war either concluded or continued, depending on the Dragonborn's choices and actions. The various Jarls struggled to reassert authority after the chaos of the dragon crisis. The question of what to do about the dragons still flying across Skyrim had no clear answer. Some advocated for continued hunting and extermination. Others suggested attempting to establish some form of accommodation. The Dragonborn, by virtue of their unique position and demonstrated power, had significant influence over which approach would prevail. Dragon remains became valuable once more. Dragon bone and dragon scale, which had been rare curiosities for centuries, were suddenly available again as dragons fell in combat. Smiths learned or relearned the techniques for working these materials into weapons and armor of extraordinary quality. Alchemists experimented with dragon blood and other body parts, discovering or rediscovering their alchemical properties. The economic impact of suddenly having access to these legendary materials rippled through Skyrim's markets. The return of dragons had proven several things beyond doubt. First, that ancient threats could return no matter how long they had been dormant. Second, that prophecy sometimes spoke true, as the last Dragonborn had appeared precisely when needed. Third, that even immortal beings could be defeated when mortals found the will and way to resist them. And finally, that the relationship between dragons and mortals remained complex, neither purely hostile nor capable of easy accommodation. As the immediate crisis passed and some stability returned to Skyrim, questions lingered. What would the surviving dragons do without Alduin to lead or control them? Would they gradually withdraw from the world again, as they had after the Dragon War? Would some find ways to coexist with mortal civilization? Would new conflicts erupt between dragons seeking to assert dominance and humans unwilling to submit? The answers to these questions would unfold over time, shaping the future relationship between two species whose fates seem permanently intertwined. And the last Dragonborn, hero of the Dragon Crisis, faced their own uncertain future. They possessed a dragon soul and could absorb the essence of those they killed. This gave them immense power, but also raised questions about their own nature. Were they truly mortal, or something else? Would they eventually face the same domineering impulses that drove dragons toward tyranny? Could they maintain their humanity while carrying such power within them? Only time would tell. Dragon nature, understanding the children of time. To truly comprehend the history of dragons in Skyrim requires understanding what dragons fundamentally are, not merely as powerful creatures, but as beings whose nature shapes everything about their relationship with the world and mortal races. Dragons are not simply large reptiles with breath weapons and wings. They are immortal children of Akatosh, beings intrinsically connected to time itself, possessing souls that define them as much as their physical forms. The immortality of dragons sets them apart from almost everything else in Nirn. They do not age in the conventional sense. A dragon who has existed for 10,000 years may show signs of great age, broken horns, tattered wings, dulled scales, but these are the scars of experience and battle rather than genuine aging. Left unmolested, a dragon could exist indefinitely, unchanged by the passage of centuries or millennia. They remember ages that mortal races know only through fragmentary historical records. This immortality profoundly shapes draconic psychology. Imagine existing for so long that entire civilizations rise and fall within your lifetime. Empires that seem eternal to mortal perspective become brief episodes. Historical events that humans consider ancient remain fresh memories. This perspective makes dragons simultaneously patient beyond mortal comprehension and dismissive of mortal concerns that seem utterly ephemeral to their timeless viewpoint. Dragons think in terms of centuries and millennia rather than days or years. A problem that seems urgent to mortals might not require immediate attention from a dragon's perspective. A plan that would take generations to unfold seems perfectly reasonable. Grudges held for thousands of years remain fresh and compelling. The dragon concept of soon might mean anything from tomorrow to a decade hence, while long ago could refer to events that occurred before humans even arrived in Tamriel. Yet immortality does not mean invulnerability. Dragons can be killed through violence, their physical forms destroyed in battle. When this happens, the dragon's soul persists, able to be absorbed by another dragon or by a dragonborn. This absorption transfers not merely power, but also knowledge and memory. A dragon who absorbs another's soul gains understanding of everything that dragon knew and experienced. This makes elder dragons, who have absorbed the souls of many lesser dragons over ages, repositories of knowledge spanning millennia. The draconic drive for dominance represents perhaps their most defining characteristic. Dragons are not merely inclined toward dominance, they are fundamentally compelled by it. Their nature demands that they assert their will over everything around them, that they prove their superiority through deed and word, that they constantly establish and maintain their position in the hierarchy of power. This is not a choice dragons make, but rather something inherent to what they are. This drive manifests in multiple ways. Dragons engage in what mortals perceive as combat, but what they experience as debate. When two dragons fight, they are simultaneously arguing philosophically about who is right, who is stronger, whose perspective deserves to prevail. The violence is not separate from the discussion, but rather is the discussion, expressed through the voice and claw and fang. The victor in such an exchange proves not merely physical superiority, but also philosophical correctness, at least from the draconic perspective. The relationship between dragons and the voice demonstrates this principle clearly. For dragons, there is no distinction between speaking, arguing, and fighting. Their language is their weapon is their language. When a dragon breathes fire or frost, they are speaking words of power that reshape reality according to their will. When they use the thu'um, they are simultaneously making a statement about reality and forcing reality to conform to that statement. Language and violence are unified in draconic existence. Dragons form hierarchies based on power, with the strongest claiming dominance over the lesser. These hierarchies remain mostly stable, but can shift when a lesser dragon grows strong enough to challenge a superior, or when an external force, such as a powerful mortal, disrupts the established order. Dragon etiquette dictates that when two dragons meet, the elder speaks first as a sign of respect for age and accumulated power. To violate this protocol represents a serious breach of draconic propriety. Alduin stood at the apex of this hierarchy, not merely because he was firstborn, but because his power exceeded that of all other dragons. He claimed the title of World Eater, and with it authority over all dragonkind. Other dragons might resent this dominance, might privately question whether Alduin truly deserved his position, but few were willing to openly challenge him. Parthenax's betrayal during the Dragon War represented something almost unprecedented, a dragon turning against the established hierarchy of his own kind. The dragon language, Dovahzul, is intrinsic to their being rather than something they learn. Dragons are born understanding their language instinctively, able to speak it from the moment they emerge into existence. This language carries power because each word is not merely a symbol representing a concept, but rather is the concept itself made audible. To speak the word for fire in the dragon language while channeling one's will properly is to create fire. To speak the word for force while projecting power is to generate that force. This makes the dragon language fundamentally different from mortal speech. Human languages use arbitrary sounds to represent ideas. The word fire in any human tongue has no inherent connection to flame. It's simply a convention that speakers have agreed upon. But in Dovahzul, the word for fire is fire itself, compressed into phonetic form. This is why mortals can learn to use the voice, but must do so through years or decades of meditation and training. They must understand not just the sounds, but the fundamental concepts those sounds embody. A dragon's name is never arbitrary. Each dragon bears a name composed of 3 words of power in Dovahzul, words that describe their nature, accomplishments, or defining characteristics. These names are earned rather than given, marking significant achievements or revealing aspects of the dragon's essential self. Alduin means destroyer, devour master, perfectly capturing his nature as the world eater. Parthenax translates to ambition, overlord, cruelty, words that spoke to his character during his time as Alduin's lieutenant, though he would later transcend this nature through philosophy and discipline. Dragons can grant names to mortals they respect, an act that represents significant recognition of that mortal's achievements. When dragons address someone by name in the dragon language, they are acknowledging that person as significant, worthy of being identified rather than dismissed as just another fleeting mortal. The title Dovahkiin itself, Dragonborn, represents such recognition, acknowledging that the bearer possesses something of draconic essence despite their mortal form. The physical capabilities of dragons match their metaphysical nature. A dragon's scales provide armor superior to any mortal creation, able to turn aside the sharpest blade or deflect many magical attacks. These scales come in various colors and patterns, often corresponding to the dragon's preferred breath weapon. Red, black, and orange scales typically mark a fire-breathing dragon, while white and blue scales indicate frost affinity. Yet these are tendencies rather than absolute rules, and some dragons can switch between breath weapons. Dragon wings, though they appear fragile, can carry massive weight through mechanisms that combine physical structure with magical enhancement. A dragon can hover motionless for extended periods, dive with tremendous speed, or ride thermals for hours without tiring. Their flight combines natural ability with thu'um-based enhancement, allowing them to achieve speeds and maneuvers that purely physical flight would not permit. A dragon's claws can shred steel armor and rend stone. Their tails can sweep aside multiple opponents or shatter walls with a single blow. Their teeth can pierce through most materials, yet these physical weapons often serve as secondary to their breath and voice. A dragon prefers to fight from the air when possible, using their breath weapon to attack from a position where most enemies cannot effectively retaliate. dragons require far less sustenance than their size might suggest. They can subsist for long periods without food, possibly drawing energy directly from magical sources or from the ambient forces that permeate Nirn. When they do consume food, they prefer meat, but are not particularly discriminating about its source. Accounts from the Dragon War era mention dragons carrying off livestock and occasionally humans, though whether this represented actual feeding behavior or simply an assertion of dominance remains debated. The lair-dwelling behavior of dragons demonstrates their territorial nature. A dragon claims a specific location as its lair and fiercely defends it against intrusion. These lairs are often chosen for strategic value: high altitude providing good visibility, natural fortification making ground assault difficult, proximity to word walls or other sources of power. Dragons may share general territory with others of their kind, but each individual dragon maintains its own specific lair that no other dragon would enter without invitation or intent to challenge. Dragon hordes, a common feature in many traditional dragon tales, exist in Skyrim, but seem less motivated by avarice than by simple accumulation. Dragons don't particularly value gold or gems for their own sake. Rather, treasure accumulates in their lairs as a side effect of their long existence and the tendency of mortals to hide valuables in remote locations. A dragon living in a cavern for centuries will inevitably end up surrounded by treasures, whether they care about them or not. Reproduction among dragons remains poorly understood, perhaps because dragons maintain privacy about such matters, or because they reproduce rarely enough that few opportunities exist to observe the process. Some scholars theorize that dragons emerged fully formed from Akatosh during the Dawn era, rather than being born in conventional ways. Others suggest that dragons can reproduce but do so incredibly rarely, perhaps only once in many centuries. What little evidence exists suggests that dragons mature slowly, even by their own standards, with younger dragons remaining weaker than adults for very long periods. The bond dragons feel with each other, despite their hierarchical nature, runs deeper than mortal kinship. They are all children of Akatosh, sharing fundamental connections that transcend individual identity. When a dragon dies and its soul is absorbed, other dragons sense the loss. When Alduin returned and began resurrecting fallen dragons, those who remained hidden felt it occurring. This connection exists as a background awareness, similar to how a mortal might sense the general presence of sunlight without consciously noting it most of the time. This explains why dragons can coordinate across vast distances without obvious communication. They simply know where other dragons are, at least approximately, and can feel the general state of dragon affairs. This awareness extends to Dragonborn, whom dragons sense as simultaneously kin and threat. The Dragonborn possesses a dragon soul, but uses that power to kill dragons, creating a paradox that most dragons find deeply disturbing. Parthenax's transformation through philosophy demonstrates that dragons are not slaves to their nature, even if that nature compels them strongly toward dominance. Through meditation and deliberate discipline practiced over millennia, Parthenax overcame the draconic drive for power. He speaks openly about his constant struggle, admitting that even after thousands of years of practicing the way of the voice, he still feels tempted to return to his original nature. The domineering instinct does not vanish, but rather must be continuously overcome through conscious choice. This suggests that other dragons could potentially follow similar paths, though Parthenax expresses skepticism about how many would have the patience and dedication required. Most dragons lack motivation to change. They are comfortable with their nature and see no reason to fight against it. Only unusual circumstances, such as profound defeat or witnessing consequences that shake their worldview, might inspire a dragon to seek fundamental transformation. Understanding dragon nature illuminates why the dragon crisis unfolded as it did. Alduin returns seeking to re-establish draconic dominance not from malice, but from fundamental compulsion. The resurrected dragons followed him not from loyalty alone, but because hierarchy and dominance are how dragons naturally organize themselves. The few dragons who defected to the Dragonborn side did so because draconic nature also compels recognition of superior power. When confronted with undeniable evidence that the Dragonborn exceeded Alduin in strength, those dragons' nature demanded that they acknowledge the new hierarchy. The relationship between dragons and mortal races will likely remain complicated forever. Dragons cannot simply choose to become peaceful or egalitarian. Such things violate their fundamental nature. Mortals cannot forget millennia of oppression or trust beings whose every instinct drives them toward dominance. The best outcome might be stable coexistence based on mutual deterrence. Dragons recognize that mortals can kill them if pressed too far. Mortals recognize that dragons remain powerful and dangerous even in defeat, and both maintain wary distance punctuated by occasional cooperation when necessity demands it. The last Dragonborn represents perhaps the ideal mediator between these species, possessing draconic power and mortal perspective. They can speak to dragons as an equal or superior, commanding respect that no normal mortal could achieve. Simultaneously, they understand mortal concerns and maintain connections to human society. Whether this position allows them to forge lasting peace or merely delays inevitable conflict remains to be seen. But understanding dragon nature, recognizing both its magnificent aspects and its terrible compulsions, provides the necessary foundation for any hope of long-term coexistence between these ancient children of time and the brief, bright lives of mortal races. Legacy and future. What dragons mean for Skyrim. The return of dragons fundamentally altered Skyrim in ways that will echo through generations. Even with Alduin defeated and the immediate crisis past, dragons remain active across the province. Their presence raises questions that have no easy answers. Challenges that Skyrim must address, not just immediately, but for the foreseeable future. The Age of Dragons has returned, though in what form and with what consequences remains to be determined. The most immediate practical impact concerns security. Dragons can strike almost anywhere in Skyrim at any time. While they generally avoid heavily defended cities, smaller settlements and travelers on the roads remain vulnerable. The Jarls have responded by strengthening their guards, establishing watch posts specifically designed to spot approaching dragons, and training their forces in tactics for fighting these threats. Yet no defense is perfect, and dragon attacks remain a constant danger. Economically, the return of dragons brings both challenges and opportunities. The availability of dragon bone and dragon scale for the first time in thousands of years has revolutionized certain industries. Smiths who master working these materials can create weapons and armor of legendary quality. Alchemists experiment with dragon parts, developing potions of extraordinary potency. The wealthy scramble to acquire dragon-derived items, driving prices to astronomical levels. But this economic opportunity exists only because people risk their lives hunting dragons, and each hunt carries the possibility of failure and death. The cultural impact may prove even more profound than the economic or security concerns. For thousands of years, dragons existed as myths, stories told to children, subjects for scholarly debate but not living reality. Suddenly they are real again, undeniable, impossible to dismiss as legend. This forces a re-evaluation of many other ancient tales. If dragons are real, what about other creatures and events relegated to mythology? The boundary between myth and history is blurred, and Skyrim's understanding of its own past must adjust accordingly. Religious implications reverberate through Nordic society. The traditional Nordic pantheon includes Akatosh, the dragon god of time, understood by the Nords as Ari El, or simply as the supreme divine force. Dragons, as Akatosh's children, occupy a complex theological position. Are they divine beings deserving reverence? Are they merely powerful creatures with no more theological significance than particularly mighty bears? The dragon cult, discredited for millennia, claimed dragons were gods. Their return doesn't validate the cult's tyranny, but it does complicate the religious landscape. The Greybeards face questions about their role in a world where dragons are active again. For thousands of years, they maintained their monastery and practiced the way of the voice in relative isolation, intervening in worldly affairs only in the most exceptional circumstances. Now dragons fly the skies, and the Greybeards possess knowledge about dragons and the thu'um that could prove valuable. Should they maintain their traditional isolation, or does the changed situation demand a more active role? Different Greybeards likely hold different views on this question. Paarthurnax's position remains particularly complex. He aided in defeating Alduin and teaches surviving dragons about the way of the voice, hoping to help them overcome their domineering nature. But he also committed atrocities during his time as Alduin's lieutenant thousands of years ago. The Blades demand his death as justice for those ancient crimes. The Dragonborn's choice regarding Paarthurnax sets a precedent. Do past crimes remain punishable forever, or can millennia of changed behavior and genuine philosophical transformation earn redemption? Skyrim as a society must grapple with this question. The surviving dragons themselves represent the most unpredictable element. Each dragon is an individual with their own personality, motivations, and choices. Some may genuinely attempt to follow Paarthurnax's teachings and overcome their nature. Others may seek to establish their own territories and demand tribute from nearby human settlements. Still others might withdraw to remote regions, wanting nothing to do with mortal affairs. And a few might actively seek to continue Alduin's work, gathering followers and attempting to rebuild some form of draconic dominion. Odahvin's case demonstrates one possible path. After being defeated by the Dragonborn, he acknowledged the Dragonborn's superiority and offered his service. His cooperation proved crucial in reaching Skuldafn and eventually defeating Alduin. In the aftermath, he maintains his recognition of the Dragonborn's authority while expressing skepticism about Paarthurnax's philosophy. He represents a dragon who has adapted to new circumstances while remaining fundamentally true to his nature. He serves the strongest, and currently the Dragonborn represents that strength. But what happens when the Dragonborn dies? Dragonborn are mortal despite their dragon souls. Eventually, through age or violence or simply bad fortune, the last Dragonborn will die. When that happens, the balance of power shifts dramatically. Dragons might continue honoring agreements made with the Dragonborn out of respect or habit. They might see the Dragonborn's death as releasing them from all obligations. Or they might view the death as an opportunity to reassert dominance over mortals who no longer have a Dragonborn to defend them. This raises uncomfortable questions about Skyrim's long-term security. Can the province maintain defenses capable of handling dragons indefinitely? The Dragon War required extraordinary circumstances to end in human victory. Paarthurnax's betrayal, the creation of Dragonrend, and the use of an Elder Scroll to banish Alduin. The current crisis ended because the prophesied Dragonborn appeared at precisely the right moment and proved capable of defeating Alduin. What happens next time, when there may be no prophesied hero to save the day? Some scholars argue that dragons will gradually withdraw from mortal affairs as they did after the Dragon War. The dragons who survived the original conflict eventually retreated to remote areas and lived in isolation for thousands of years. Perhaps the current generation will follow a similar pattern, deterred by the knowledge that mortals can kill them and unwilling to risk open conflict without Alduin to lead them. This represents the optimistic view. The crisis was temporary, and eventually things will return to something resembling normal. The pessimistic view suggests that dragons have learned from their previous defeat and will be more careful this time. They might establish themselves in positions that are easier to defend. They might coordinate better, maintaining communication and mutual support networks. They might work to prevent the emergence of another Dragonborn, or to eliminate threats before they mature. From this perspective, Skyrim faces an ongoing low-intensity conflict with dragons that will persist for generations, punctuated by occasional flare-ups of open warfare. A middle position suggests that dragons and mortals will eventually develop some form of working relationship. Neither true peace nor constant war, but rather a complex system of agreements, territory divisions, and occasional cooperation when interests align. Some dragons might even integrate into mortal society to a limited degree, offering their services in exchange for resources or simply for the stimulation of engaging with shorter-lived species. This seems difficult to imagine given dragons' domineering nature, but Paarthurnax demonstrates that dragons can change given sufficient motivation and time. The question of new Dragonborn adds another layer of complexity. Dragonborn do not appear on a predictable schedule. They emerge in response to need, chosen by Akatosh for reasons mortals cannot fully understand. If dragons remain active and eventually become a renewed threat, will another Dragonborn appear? Or was the last Dragonborn truly the last, their appearance marking the final confrontation between mortals and dragons? The prophecies offer no clear answers about what comes after Alduin's defeat. Educational institutions across Skyrim and beyond have begun seriously studying dragons again, after centuries of dismissing them as merely historical curiosities. The College of Winterhold, Skyrim's premier institution for magical study, now treats draconic language and biology as important fields rather than obscure specializations. Libraries that preserved ancient texts about dragons find themselves suddenly relevant again. Scholars who dedicated their careers to studying what most considered mythology discover that their expertise is urgently needed. The political implications extend beyond Skyrim's borders. Dragons occasionally appear in other provinces of Tamriel, suggesting that Alduin's return had consequences beyond just Skyrim. How the Empire and other political entities respond to this reality will shape international relations for generations. Do provinces cooperate in dealing with the dragon threat, sharing knowledge and resources? Or does each region attempt to manage dragons in isolation, potentially creating situations where dragons expelled from one area simply relocate to another? Dragon-related crime has emerged as a new category requiring attention. Poachers hunt dragons not for self-defense, but for profit, seeking to harvest dragon bone and scales. Fraudsters sell fake dragon parts to gullible buyers. Bandits ambush travelers claiming to have killed dragons and demanding payment for their protection. The legal framework for dealing with these crimes remains underdeveloped as they address situations that hadn't existed for thousands of years until recently. Children born during or after the dragon crisis will grow up in a world where dragons are normal rather than mythological. This generational shift will change how Skyrim relates to dragons fundamentally. The current generation remembers when dragons were legends. The next generation will remember only a world where dragons exist. What seems strange and threatening to one group will be normal life to another. How this changes attitudes and approaches to dealing with dragons remains to be seen. The environmental impact of dragon activity deserves consideration as well. Dragon attacks can devastate local ecosystems, destroying forests with fire, altering water sources with frost, disrupting animal populations. The long-term environmental consequences of having numerous dragons active across Skyrim will accumulate over time. Some regions may become effectively uninhabitable, forced to be surrendered to dragons who claim them as territory. Art and culture have already begun reflecting the changed reality. Bards compose songs about the dragon crisis, some celebrating the Dragonborn's heroism, others lamenting the losses suffered during dragon attacks. Painters and sculptors create works depicting dragons, attempting to capture their terrible majesty. Playwrights stage dramas about the Dragon War, finding new relevance in stories that were once merely historical. Culture processes and makes sense of traumatic events, and the return of dragons certainly qualifies as traumatic. Perhaps most intriguingly, some individuals attempt to establish personal relationships with dragons, approaching them not as threats to be destroyed, but as intelligent beings capable of communication and potentially cooperation. These attempts vary wildly in success. Most end in the would-be diplomat's death or hasty retreat, but a few report actually conversing with dragons, exchanging ideas, finding common ground. If such interactions become more common and successful, they could eventually transform how dragons and mortals relate to each other. The ruins of dragon cult temples and the dragon burial mounds take on new significance in the post-crisis world. Previously, these were merely archaeological sites, interesting to scholars but largely ignored by common folk. Now they represent both historical monuments and potential security threats. If Alduin could raise dragons from these mounds, could another powerful dragon do the same? Should the mounds be guarded or destroyed? Different regions adopt different policies, leading to a patchwork of approaches across Skyrim. The Dragonborn themselves face unique challenges. They possess power that sets them apart from ordinary mortals, but also responsibilities that come with that power. Every dragon they kill, every soul they absorb, adds to their strength, but also increases their burden. Do they have an obligation to hunt down all remaining dragons? Should they use their position to broker peace between dragons and mortals? Can they ever truly return to normal life? Or has their nature fundamentally changed in ways that make such a return impossible? Looking forward, Skyrim stands at a crossroads. The immediate crisis has passed, but the fundamental situation remains unresolved. Dragons exist. They are powerful, intelligent, and driven by their nature toward dominance. Mortals have proven they can kill dragons when necessary, but cannot eliminate them entirely. Some form of long-term arrangement must emerge, whether through negotiation, mutual deterrence, gradual withdrawal, or continued conflict. The choices made now will shape Skyrim's future for generations. Will the province invest in permanent dragon defense infrastructure, accepting that dragons are a perpetual threat, requiring constant vigilance? Will leaders attempt to establish formal agreements with dragons, creating a framework for coexistence? Will Skyrim seek to develop capabilities for eliminating dragons entirely, attempting to finish what the Dragon War began? Each path carries consequences, costs, and uncertain outcomes. What remains certain is that Skyrim has been transformed. The return of dragons marks a historical inflection point comparable to the original Dragon War itself. The age that followed the Dragon War lasted thousands of years, an epoch defined by the absence of dragons and the gradual forgetting of what they represented. That age has ended. What comes next depends on choices made by both dragons and mortals. Choices that will determine whether these two species can share the world, or whether one must inevitably dominate the other. The dragons themselves may have the final word on this question. They are ancient beings with perspectives that span ages. They have witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. They understand patience in ways mortals cannot match. Perhaps they simply wait, knowing that mortal societies change and transform while dragon nature remains fundamentally constant. Perhaps they recognize that time itself favors their survival, that their immortality gives them an advantage that no amount of mortal heroism can entirely overcome. But mortals possess their own advantages: creativity, adaptability, the ability to forge new solutions to ancient problems. They have killed dragons before and can do so again. They have learned the voice and can use it against those who once wielded it with sole authority. They have produced heroes capable of standing against even the mightiest of dragonkind. This too is a kind of power, one that should not be underestimated. The complete history of dragons in Skyrim is still being written. The ancient chapters from the Dawn era through the Dragon War and the Long Sleep are complete. The chapter describing the dragon crisis and Alduin's defeat has concluded, but the final chapters remain unwritten, dependent on actions yet to be taken and choices yet to be made. Dragons and mortals both must decide what kind of future they wish to create, and whether that future can accommodate both species, or whether eternal conflict is inevitable. Whatever comes, the return of dragons has reminded Skyrim of an essential truth. The past is never truly dead, and the forces that shaped history can return when least expected. The age of dragons has dawned again, and this time there may be no sleeping for thousands of years, no comfortable forgetting. This time, dragons and mortals must find a way to share the world, or one must finally eliminate the other. The stakes are absolute, the consequences permanent. and the future remains uncertain. But uncertainty also means possibility. Perhaps this time will be different. Perhaps the lessons of history learned at such terrible cost will finally take root. Perhaps dragons and mortals can forge something new. A relationship based on mutual respect rather than dominance and submission. It seems unlikely given everything that has come before, but history has surprised us before. The Age of Dragons has returned. What happens next is up to those who live through it, both the ancient children of time and the brief, brilliant mortals, who have proven themselves capable of standing against impossible odds. And so our tale comes to a close. Thank you for journeying with me tonight, Cozy Nights. If this story helped you rest, consider leaving a like. It helps other weary travelers find their way to our fireside. And remember, there are many more tales waiting for you here by the fire. Until next time, sleep peacefully and have a cozy night.